Jump it, Jehoshaphat. What a nice day.
They were the kings of chaos in prime time. Two cops in a patrol car, wreaking comedic havoc across the Bronx. But today, the voices have gone silent. The laughter faded, and the cast of Car 54. Where are you? So full of life, quirks, and brilliance, now lives only in old reels and half-forgotten obituaries. It was supposed to be just a sitcom, a harmless, goofy portrayal of misfit police officers navigating absurd situations. But few knew the pain behind the punchlines. Joe E. Ross, hailed as a comedic genius, was drowning in failed marriages, backstage tantrums, and a lonely death on stage. Fred Gwynne, admired for his quiet gravitas, spent decades resenting the role that made him famous, quietly dying of cancer in a farmhouse far from Hollywood. And Charlotte Rae, Al Lewis, Paul Reed, one by one, they slipped away, some quietly, others tragically, leaving behind stories far darker and more fascinating than anything written in a script. So what happened to the beloved misfits of Car 54? Who paid the price for laughter? What secrets did they carry long after the cameras stopped rolling? This is not just about a forgotten TV show. It's about fame, failure, and the lives that unravel when the spotlight turned off. Subscribe now to uncover what really happened to the stars of Car 54. Where are you? Because the real drama wasn't on the screen. It was behind it. One, Joe E. Ross, Officer Gunther Tootie. He never intended to be polished. He wasn't handsome, eloquent, or disciplined. But somehow Joe E. Ross made it onto millions of television screens by being exactly what he was: loud, clumsy, and completely unforgettable. Born in New York City, Ross left school early and drifted into the city's underbelly, working as a singing waiter in gangster-run speakeasies before becoming a burlesque MC. His brand of humor was rough, never rehearsed. Never elegant, but it landed. When World War II broke out, he served in the Army Air Corps, then returned to the only world he knew, the stage. Hollywood didn't come calling until much later. His big break came when comedian Phil Silvers caught his act and saw potential behind chaos. Ross joined the Phil Silvers Show as the bumbling Sergeant Ritzik, a role that felt like an extension of himself. That set the stage for his most iconic character, Officer Gunther Tootie in Car 54. Where are you? In that role, Ross was electric, wild-eyed, loud-mouthed, always flustered. But what audiences didn't know was that Ross often forgot his lines. His signature cry, "Ooh," wasn't a punchline. It was a reflex, a nervous stutter that producers turned into a trademark. It worked. The show worked. But Ross was already unraveling. Behind the scenes, he was volatile, difficult to direct, hard to like. His colleagues respected his talent, but dreaded his presence. Off camera, he cycled through multiple marriages and was known for keeping company with women from the late-night entertainment circuit. He never tried to hide who he was. He didn't care to. After Car 54 ended, his career slid. He starred briefly in It's About Time, a forgotten sitcom that landed with a thud. From there, it was a string of low-budget comedies, background roles, and voice work. He released a novelty album few heard and performed wherever he could: clubs, lounges, even retirement homes. In the final years of his life, Ross performed in modest venues, doing stand-up for residents at his apartment complex in Van Nuys. That's where the final curtain fell. In the middle of a routine, Ross sat down, clutched his chest, and died of a heart attack, on stage in front of an audience. A comedian to the bitter end. According to one account, his wife went to collect the $100 fee he had been promised for the night. The management handed her $50. He didn't finish the show, they said. On his tombstone are etched the words: "This man had a ball. Unrefined, unpredictable, and often unbearable. Joe E. Ross was no Hollywood prince, but he made people laugh. And sometimes, that's all it takes to be remembered." 2. Fred Gwynne, Officer Francis Muldoon. He was the calm to Joe E. Ross's chaos, the towering, deep-voiced straight man who anchored the lunacy of Car 54. Where are you? But Fred Gwynne was more than a comic foil. He was an artist, a scholar, a reluctant icon trapped in a body too tall and a face too memorable. Born and raised in New York City, Gwynne came from privilege. He attended the elite Groton School, served as a radio man in the Navy during World War II, then studied English at Harvard. At Harvard, he drew cartoons for the Lampoon, sang in the Glee Club, and discovered the stage. Acting wasn't a childhood dream. It was a craft he took seriously. He didn't chase laughs, he chased truth. After a few small roles on television, Gwynne landed his first Broadway part in Mrs. McThing opposite Helen Hayes. His screen presence was undeniable. 6'5", solemn face, and a rich baritone voice that made everything he said sound like gospel. His big TV break came when Nat Hiken cast him as Officer Francis Muldoon. It was a comedy role, but Gwynne never played it for laughs. He played it for honesty. The chemistry between Gwynne and Ross was lightning in a bottle. Ross was manic, erratic, and loud. Gwynne was composed, understated, and quietly hilarious. Together, they elevated Car 54 into something more than slapstick. It became a portrait of absurdity grounded in character. But while the show gained a cult following, it lasted only 2 seasons, and then came the role that both made and haunted him. In 1964, Gwynne took on Herman Munster in The Munsters, a Frankenstein's monster in suburban America. He wore heavy lifts, pounds of makeup, and layers of foam under hot lights. The physical toll was brutal, the psychological toll worse. While the show became a beloved classic, Gwynne felt trapped. The industry couldn't see past the green face and towering boots. For years, he fought typecasting. Roles dried up. He returned to the stage. He painted. He wrote children's books, clever, beautifully illustrated works like The King Who Reigned and A Chocolate Mousse for Dinner. But in casting offices, he was still Herman Munster. It wasn't until the 1980s that his career quietly revived. He took character roles in serious films: The Cotton Club, Ironweed, Pet Sematary. In 1992, he delivered a performance that stunned a new generation as the gruff, scene-stealing Judge Chamberlain Holler in My Cousin Vinny. It was the last great performance of his life. Fred Gwynne died in rural Maryland from pancreatic cancer, just days before his 67th birthday. He had spent his later years far from the spotlight, living in a renovated farmhouse, painting, writing, and finally being left alone. He hated fame, but he never stopped creating. Behind the towering figure and the deadpan stare was a quiet man who wanted to be taken seriously, not as a monster, not as a cop, but as an artist. 3. Al Lewis, Officer Leo Schnauzer. If Fred Gwynne was the gentle giant of Car 54, then Al Lewis was its wild card. Unpredictable, squinty-eyed, and unmistakably New York. As Officer Leo Schnauzer, he brought chaos, charm, and a comic fire that lit up every scene he touched. But Lewis was never just an actor. He was a showman, a political agitator, a restaurant owner, a man who blurred the line between character and self until the two became one. Born Alexander Meister in Manhattan, Lewis claimed many things about his life, some true, others exaggerated, some never confirmed. He said he worked as a circus performer in the 1920s, that he held a PhD in child psychology from Columbia, that he was a teacher and an author before ever stepping onto a stage. What's real and what's myth hardly mattered. What counted was his presence, larger than life, defiant, and unforgettable. He found his way into acting through New York's vaudeville and burlesque scene, eventually making it to Broadway. But it was television that gave him a national audience. On Car 54, Where Are You?, Lewis played Schnauzer like a ticking time bomb, loud, twitchy, always a split second away from boiling over. It was comic genius, paired perfectly with his real-life friend Fred Gwynne. When Car 54 ended, Lewis followed Gwynne into monster history. In 1964, he was cast as Grandpa in The Munsters, a vampire who looked like Dracula and behaved like Groucho Marx. The role cemented his cult status. Dressed in a cape, with white makeup and a gleam in his eye, Lewis became a pop icon for generations of misfits and midnight movie lovers. But acting was only one chapter in his story. In the 1980s, he opened a restaurant in Greenwich Village called Grandpa's, where he'd greet guests, tell stories, and sometimes jump behind the stove. He ran for governor of New York in 1998 under the Green Party. He didn't win, but he didn't care. Winning wasn't the point. Stirring things up was. He was a fixture on local radio, a regular on Howard Stern's show, a man who never stopped speaking his mind. Whether talking politics or telling behind-the-scenes stories from the Munsters, Lewis made sure people listened. In his final years, he slowed down but never disappeared. He remained active, giving interviews, pushing boundaries, and keeping his legacy loud. He died in New York City from natural causes at the age of 82. Al Lewis never cared for subtlety. In an industry full of make-believe, he made sure one thing was always real: his voice. 4. Paul Reed, Captain Martin Block. He wasn't the clown. He wasn't the straight man. He was the wall they bounced off, the voice of order amid absurdity. As Captain Block in Car 54, Where Are You?, Paul Reed played the perpetually exasperated police captain who always seemed one meltdown away from total collapse. But behind the scowls and slow burns was a trained performer with decades of stagecraft, a survivor of hardship, and a man who rose from orphanages to Broadway lights. Born Sidney Kahn in Highland Falls, New York, Paul Reed was one of 7 children in a Russian-Jewish immigrant family. After his father died young, the siblings were separated and placed in orphanages. It was the older brothers and sisters, children themselves, who later found a way to reunite the family and start over in Brooklyn. That beginning shaped everything. Reed wasn't just tough. He was built from loss, driven by reunion, and hungry for something bigger than survival. He began performing as a radio singer under the names Paul Roberts and later Paul Reed. By his early 30s, he had broken into Broadway, making his debut in The Gondoliers in 1940. He followed it with roles in Trial by Jury, La Vie Parisienne, and musicals like Guys and Dolls, The Music Man, and Promises, Promises. He wasn't a household name, but within the industry, Reed was respected, consistent, commanding, and sharp as a blade. Television eventually came calling, and Reed transitioned seamlessly. He worked with Sid Caesar in the 1950s, appearing on Caesar's Hour and Sid Caesar Invites You. But his defining role came in 1961, when he was cast as Captain Martin Block in Car 54, Where Are You? Reed's portrayal of a balding, beleaguered superior officer brought a different kind of comedy, controlled chaos. While others on the show screamed or stumbled, Reed simmered. His slow burn reactions, deadpan sarcasm, and mounting frustration gave the show its perfect counterbalance. After Car 54, Reed stayed active in television. He played the boss in The Carl Williams Show and made appearances in Bewitched, The Donna Reed Show, The Beverly Hillbillies, and even The Munsters, reuniting with his old castmates. Always, he played authority figures, businessmen, military men, politicians, characters who seemed in control, even if they were slowly unraveling. Reed's film career was less remarkable. He appeared in a few late 60s comedies that critics were quick to forget. But he never needed the movies. He returned to commercials, the stage, and lived out his final decades working steadily, even into his 80s. Off-screen, his life was quiet. He was married to Broadway dancer June McLaren for nearly 60 years. They had one son, Paul Jr., a jazz and rock drummer who also wrote for theater. Reed lived long, worked hard, and left behind a reputation as a rock-solid performer who never lost his dignity, even in a business that tried to strip it from everyone. Paul Reed passed away in 2007 at the age of 97. His wife June followed just 7 weeks later. They're buried together in Pemaquid, Maine, in a cast filled with chaos. Paul Reed was the calm center, and perhaps the most underrated force holding Car 54 together. 5. Nipsey Russell, Officer Anderson. He brought rhythm to comedy, poetry to punchlines, and dignity to a role few expected would matter. As Officer Anderson in Car 54, Where Are You?, Nipsey Russell wasn't just a side character. He was a quiet revolution. In an era when black actors were often boxed into stereotypes, Russell slipped through with a grin, a rhyme, and a presence that demanded attention. Born in Atlanta, Georgia, he came of age in a segregated America, but never let it define the limits of his ambition. He served with distinction in World War II, rising to the rank of captain, an almost unheard of achievement for a black man at the time. After the war, he entered show business the hard way, through dance, cabaret, and endless nights on the road. He wasn't just funny, he was musical, agile, and sharp. His delivery was like jazz, unexpected, syncopated, and smooth. In the 1950s, Russell broke into television through music reviews and comedy specials. What was his role on Car 54, Where Are You? That marked a quiet milestone. As Officer Anderson, Russell portrayed a uniformed black police officer at a time when such a sight on mainstream television was virtually non-existent. And he didn't play a caricature. He played a man, smart, dry-witted, part of the team. It was groundbreaking without fanfare, and that was precisely its power. After leaving the show, Russell's career exploded in a different direction. He became a mainstay of television variety and game shows. Match Game, To Tell the Truth, Hollywood Squares. Wherever there was a quick wit needed, he was there. But what made him unforgettable was his unique weapon, poetry. Russell delivered four-line topical rhymes with elegance and bite, earning the nickname the Poet Laureate of television. In an industry full of rehearsed charm, he was truly original. Though his film roles were limited, he made a lasting impression as the Tin Man in The Wiz, a soulful, stylized remake of The Wizard of Oz. The film struggled at the box office, but later became a cult classic, and Russell's performance stood out for its grace and heart. What made Nipsey Russell so singular was his restraint. He didn't shout. He didn't chase attention. He let the words carry him. In a time of excess, he offered precision. In a time of exclusion, he walked in with humor and never apologized for being sharper than everyone else in the room. He never married, never courted tabloid fame. He lived alone, read deeply, and held tight control over his private life. When he passed away in New York City in 2005, just shy of his 87th birthday, the tributes came not with scandal, but with reverence. Nipsey Russell didn't need the spotlight. He lit it himself, with rhyme, wit, and a quiet kind of pride that made everyone around him stand up straighter. 6. Beatrice Pons, Lucille Tootie. She was the voice waiting at home, the shrill reminder of reality, the off-screen thundercloud that hovered over Gunther Tootie's head. As Lucille Tootie in Car 54, Where Are You? Beatrice Pons played the archetypal nagging wife, but she brought to it something sharper, smarter, and far more enduring than the stereotype ever deserved. Born Beatrice Posner in the early 20th century, she began her career in a time when few women were taken seriously on stage, let alone in comedy. But Pons never waited for permission. She made her Broadway debut in the 1930s and spent the next decades moving seamlessly between theater, radio, and eventually television. She was a working actress in the purest sense of the term, versatile, reliable, and fiercely present in every role she took. Her partnership with Joe E. Ross became something of a minor miracle in sitcom history. The two had already played husband and wife in The Phil Silvers Show, and when Car 54, Where Are You? Was cast, they were brought back together. Ross, with his barely contained mayhem, needed a counterpart who wouldn't be drowned out by the noise. Pons delivered. Her Lucille wasn't just shrill, she was cutting. She didn't just nag, she won every argument before it started. And somehow, beneath the glares and groans, there was something weirdly affectionate about their dysfunctional dynamic. Off-screen, Pons's life was far more grounded than the chaos she often portrayed. She was married to David Ross, ironically sharing the same last name as her on-screen husband for nearly 4 decades. Unlike many of her peers, she avoided the limelight and the scandal that so often followed it. She worked steadily, quietly, and left a long trail of performances behind her. In her later years, she made a sharp left turn, appearing under the pseudonym Rose Ross in the cult horror film Mother's Day in 1980. The role was shocking, brutal, and a complete break from her sitcom image. It suggested there was far more to her range than audiences had been allowed to see. Beatrice Pons passed away in 1991 in New York City, leaving behind a legacy not of flash, but of form. She was never the lead, never the one whose name came first. But when she was on screen, she made sure you remembered her. In a show filled with over-the-top performances and slapstick chaos, she brought the sting. Lucille Tootie may have been written as a joke, but thanks to Pons, she became the punchline that left a mark. 7. Charlotte Rae, Sylvia Schnauzer. She appeared in only a handful of episodes on Car 54. Where Are You? But Charlotte Rae made them count. As Sylvia Schnauzer, wife of the erratic officer Schnauzer played by Al Lewis, she brought a screeching intensity, manic timing, and an energy that pushed the already chaotic series into outright absurdity. But Rae's legacy wasn't built on one sitcom cameo. It was a career that stretched across 7 decades, defined by fearless comedy, emotional vulnerability, and a deep commitment to the craft. Born in Milwaukee to Russian Jewish immigrants, Charlotte Rae Labotsky was a classically trained performer. She studied drama at Northwestern University and roomed with the future screen legend Cloris Leachman. Her early career was rooted in cabaret, musical theater, and dramatic stage work, an eclectic foundation that would later define her brand of character-driven comedy. By the time she joined Car 54, Rae had already appeared on Broadway and television, building a reputation as a comedic scene stealer. Her portrayal of Sylvia Schnauzer was unhinged in the best way. She yelled, flailed, sobbed, and clung to her husband in public meltdowns that bordered on operatic. She matched Al Lewis's wild energy beat for beat, creating a marriage so dysfunctional it became unforgettable. But that was only the beginning. In the late 1970s, Charlotte Rae would land the role that would make her a pop culture icon. Edna Garrett, the house mother in Different Strokes, and later the central character in its spin-off, The Facts of Life. As Mrs. Garrett, Rae portrayed a strong, compassionate, and often hilariously exasperated maternal figure who anchored a show about adolescent chaos. She stayed with the series for 7 seasons, mentoring not just the fictional girls on screen, but generations of viewers growing up with her wisdom and warmth. Away from the spotlight, Rae faced her own share of personal trials. She spoke candidly about navigating heartbreak in her marriage, the emotional toll of complex revelations, and the long road towards self-understanding. She also addressed, with clarity and grace, a period in her life where she relied on alcohol to numb the pain, and how she eventually found the strength to move beyond it. In her final years, Rae returned to theater, took small roles in films like Ricky and The Flash, and published a memoir, The Facts of My Life, co-written with her son. It revealed a woman who had spent her life performing but never hiding. Charlotte Rae passed away in 2018 at the age of 92 after a long battle with bone cancer. Her voice, with its unmistakable pitch and tremble, is etched into the memory of anyone who grew up watching sitcoms in the golden age of television. She may have started as a supporting player in the chaos of Car 54, but she ended as something far greater, a woman who turned pain into punchlines and made millions feel like they still had someone to turn to. Car 54, Where Are You? Only lasted 2 seasons, but the echoes of its cast, those chaotic, unforgettable voices, still linger in the memories of anyone who ever tuned in. Behind the absurdity, the slapstick, and the shouting matches, there were real lives unfolding. Lives marked by war and hardship, by theater lights and television fame, by private heartbreaks and public applause. Joey longed to escape the shadow of the green makeup that once made him a household name. Al Lewis turned his eccentricity into activism, refusing to be silenced by anyone. They were never just actors. They were survivors, trailblazers, misfits. Their careers collided in a strange little show about 2 cops in the Bronx. And what followed was equal parts fame, frustration, and quiet fading into history. Some of them found peace. Others died mid-sentence, in mid-performance, as if the act never truly ended. They left behind punchlines, yes, but also wounds, resilience, and the kind of strange beauty that only comes from a life lived out loud. And now, they're all gone. But here, in this tribute, they return, not as characters, but as people. Real, flawed, brilliant people. If you want to keep exploring the stories behind television's forgotten legends, the laughter and the losses, the fame and the fallout, then subscribe to the channel. Because the spotlight may fade, but the truth behind it still burns bright.